Every country has its symbols of tradition and history, but few stand out as boldly and distinctly as the Royal Guards of the United Kingdom. They are more than just soldiers. They are a living link to centuries of British history. Standing motionless outside iconic landmarks like Buckingham Palace, these guards are symbols of discipline, strength, and the proud heritage of the monarchy. Their uniforms are instantly recognizable: bright red tunics, black bearskin hats, and sharp polished boots that gleam in the sun. Every detail of their appearance is meticulously planned, a reflection of the centuries-old traditions they are sworn to uphold. The Royal Guards are not just a part of London's landscape. They are a living embodiment of the country's history. Visitors from all over the world flock to London with one goal in mind: to witness the ceremony of the changing of the guard, an event that draws crowds of thousands every day. As the guards stand at attention, their stoic faces and disciplined posture leave a lasting impression on those who come to see them. But it's more than just their appearance that fascinates people. It's the sense of mystery and reverence that surrounds them. They are not just standing there for show. These guards are highly trained soldiers, selected for their exceptional discipline, skill, and strength. The Royal Guards are part of a military unit known as the Household Division, which is responsible for protecting the monarch and the royal residences. These soldiers go through a rigorous selection process that includes physical endurance, mental toughness, and an ability to perform under pressure. They are not just ceremonial. They are highly trained in combat and other military duties. The training they undergo is intense, and it requires years of dedication. They have to be in top physical shape, able to march for hours without breaking their stride or breaking their focus. To be chosen as a Royal Guard is a great honor, and it's a position that demands both respect and responsibility. But despite the strict nature of their training, the Guards are more than just soldiers in uniform. They are part of a centuries-old tradition that goes back to the reign of King Charles II in the 17th century. When the first official guards were formed, over the centuries, the role of the Royal Guard has evolved, but the essence of their duties remains the same. Today, they stand at attention in their posts, guarding the palace and serving as symbols of Britain's unbroken royal tradition. Tourists who visit London are often in awe of the Royal Guards. Many are fascinated by their ability to remain motionless for long periods, seemingly unaffected by the noise and bustle around them. To an outsider, the task of standing still in such a busy and noisy environment might seem easy. But to a Royal Guard, it's part of their training. They are taught to block out distractions and stay focused on their duty, regardless of the chaos unfolding around them. This level of concentration is not easy to achieve, especially when surrounded by large crowds of people who are eager to snap photos and ask questions every day. People from all walks of life visit the palace to see the Royal Guards in action. Some come to see the changing of the guard ceremony, a highly orchestrated event that takes place at scheduled times during the day. This ceremony involves a highly precise changeover of the guards who are on duty. It's a display of military precision and timing, and it draws huge crowds. The ceremony has become an iconic part of London's tourist attractions, and visitors gather in the early morning hours to secure a good view of the guards as they perform their routine. For many, seeing the Royal Guards is a highlight of their trip to London. Others come simply to watch the guards as they stand at attention. These tourists are often struck by the guards' stillness, which seems almost unnatural. The Royal Guards are not supposed to move, speak, or acknowledge any tourists. They stand at their posts, maintaining their composure and their silence, often for hours at a time. The contrast between their stillness and the chaotic energy of the crowds around them creates a surreal atmosphere. Visitors, whether young or old, are fascinated by the sight. The guards' stoic expressions, their disciplined movements, and the sheer focus they bring to their task leave an impression that lasts long after the visit is over. While many tourists approach the guards with awe and respect, some are more interested in trying to get a reaction. Over time, the behavior of certain tourists begins to shift from respect to something more playful, even disruptive. The royal guards have become something of an attraction. It's a spectacle for visitors to interact with rather than figures of solemn duty. Some tourists might make jokes, try to catch the guards' attention, or even attempt to photograph themselves with the guards in the background. Others are more audacious, approaching the guards too closely or even attempting to touch them, unaware that these soldiers are not there for their entertainment. Despite this behavior, the royal guards are expected to remain professional. They have been trained to ignore distractions and continue with their duty, no matter how bizarre or disruptive the tourists become. But for all their training, they are still human. The mounting frustration among the guards is becoming evident, as they silently endure the increasingly disrespectful behavior of some tourists. The situation is becoming tense, as a few individuals cross the line between harmless curiosity and outright disrespect, though it might seem like a light-hearted interaction to the tourists. For the royal guards, it is far more serious. They are not there to entertain. They are there to protect and to uphold a tradition that dates back centuries. Each day they stand watch. They are not just keeping a watchful eye on the palace, but also on the spirit of British history. As time goes on, it becomes clear that something will have to give. The tourists' behavior can no longer go unnoticed. And the guards are about to show that they will not tolerate disrespect for the traditions they represent. As the days went by, the royal guards continued to stand tall, their faces unchanging, their movements crisp and calculated. Tourists kept coming in greater numbers, drawn by the sheer allure of the palace and the guards who stood at its gates. London had always been a magnet for people from all corners of the world, and the royal guards, standing in their ceremonial post, were a symbol of the city's grandeur. But what had once been a simple exchange of admiration between the guards and the visitors was starting to change. The atmosphere around the guards was becoming less respectful and more playful. For the tourists, the guards had transformed into figures of entertainment, and it wasn't long before the line between respect and disrespect began to blur. In the beginning, tourists were in awe of the guards' discipline. They stood silently, watching in wonder at how the soldiers could remain perfectly still for hours on end. The guards didn't respond to questions or acknowledge the crowds that gathered to watch them. For some, this was a fascinating part of the experience. The sheer power of the royal guards' stoicism made them seem almost mythical. They were warriors, after all, trained to face more than just the challenges of standing still in front of thousands of onlookers. Tourists took pictures, chatted with friends, and marveled at the moment, but they kept their distance. They understood, or at least they respected, that these guards weren't there for entertainment. However, as time passed, that respect started to fade for some. The novelty of seeing the guards up close wore off, and what was once a captivating sight began to be viewed as something less serious. Tourists began to think of the guards as just another attraction in a city full of sights and sounds, rather than just watching with admiration. They started to treat the guards like part of the background scenery, a living statue or a costume for a photo op. It was as if the formality and tradition of the guards, so central to their role, was being dismissed in favor of amusement and fun. It wasn't just the lack of respect that was worrying. What concerned the guards more than anything was the gradual increase in personal space violations. Tourists, whether out of curiosity or mischief, began inching closer to the guards. Some wanted to capture the perfect shot of the stoic soldiers in their iconic uniforms. Others seemed to want to challenge the stillness of the guards, approaching them too closely, hoping for a reaction. It was as if the guards had become part of an interactive show for the crowds. Some tourists even dared to mimic the soldiers, making funny faces or copying their stances. At first, it was just a few tourists here and there, but over time, more and more people began to do it. It wasn't long before this playful behavior turned into something more disruptive. One afternoon, a group of young tourists approached one of the royal guards. They'd seen the guards standing perfectly still for hours, and they thought it would be fun to see if they could make one move. They started with light teasing, making faces at him, laughing and trying to get his attention. The guard didn't flinch, didn't even blink. How the crowd around them grew, intrigued by the little scene unfolding.
Wow.
They began to push the boundaries, stepping closer to the guard, still hoping to provoke a response. "Come on, don't you want to smile for the picture?" one of them called out. Another shouted, "Show us a little bit of emotion." To the tourists, this might have seemed like harmless fun. They saw the guards as just part of the show, like actors in a play, and they thought it was their right to interact with them however they pleased. But to the guards, this was a direct violation of their training and their duty. The royal guards were not there for amusement. Their job was to uphold the traditions and honor of the monarchy, not to entertain or indulge the whims of the crowds. And yet the tourists continued to press on, oblivious to the tension they were creating. The behavior of the tourists had crossed a line. The guards were supposed to remain impassive, a symbol of royal authority. They were trained to ignore distractions, to stand tall, no matter what was happening around them. But the more the tourists pushed, the harder it became for the guards to ignore the disruption. Their training had prepared them to withstand noise, to stay still in the face of everything from loud music to honking cars. But there was something about the disrespectful behavior of the tourists that was starting to chip away at their calm. This growing tension didn't go unnoticed by the other guards. The soldiers who stood at different posts outside the palace would occasionally exchange looks, aware of the situation. While they remained disciplined in their duty, there was a shared sense of frustration among them. They were trained to tolerate distractions, to remain stoic under pressure, but the constant disrespect was wearing thin. They could feel it in the way tourists crowded around them, in the way their personal space was invaded. The lack of respect was starting to take its toll, and the calm, steady nature of their duty was being tested. One guard, who had been serving in the royal family's service for several years, noticed the increasing disrespect of the tourists with growing concern. He had seen it all before: the children who ran too close to his post, the tourists who snapped photos without asking, and the occasional prankster who tried to make him smile. But now, the behavior was more frequent and more intense. It was as if the tourists didn't view him as a real soldier, but as a living exhibit. And while the royal guards had been trained to endure these disruptions, the challenge was growing more difficult. This wasn't just about standing still anymore. The royal guards had always been more than just statues and uniforms. They were a symbol of the monarchy itself. Each guard, in his own way, represented a piece of British history, tradition, and pride. And now, these elements were being overlooked by some visitors who saw the guards as nothing more than part of the tourist experience. The challenge of staying still was becoming secondary to the growing frustration of the guards, who were increasingly faced with disrespect from those who came to admire them. What made the situation even more complicated was the fact that the tourists themselves were unaware of the tension they were causing. To them, the guards were just another part of London's famous landmarks, another attraction to see and photograph. Many had no idea how much training and discipline it took to stand in the heat and cold for hours to remain still despite the growing distractions. And so, the cycle continued, with tourists pushing the limits and the guards doing their best to maintain their composure, all the while knowing that sooner or later, something would need to change. As the tension between the royal guards and the tourists grew, it became clear that something had to give. The patience of the guards was running thin, and while they could endure a lot, there was only so much they could take before they had to react. Something was about to happen that would forever change the dynamic between the tourists and the royal guards. It was another busy afternoon outside Buckingham Palace. The sun was shining brightly, and tourists filled the streets, snapping pictures of the palace's magnificent architecture and admiring the royal guards standing still at their posts. The guards, as usual, were dressed in their bright red uniforms with tall black bearskin hats, standing stoic and unmoving as they had been trained to do. But that day something was different. There was a noticeable shift in the crowd's behavior. The usual excitement and admiration had given way to impatience and disruption. A large group of tourists had gathered around one particular guard. They had been watching him for a while, taking their photos from a safe distance at first. But as time went on, their curiosity grew. They wanted to see if they could make him react. The guard stood motionless, his eyes focused straight ahead, his body perfectly still despite the growing noise around him. But the tourists were not satisfied with just watching from afar. One by one, they edged closer, inching toward the guard, as if testing the limits of his patience. A couple of young tourists, clearly amused by the challenge, started making faces at the guard, trying to catch his attention. They giggled and pointed at him, waiting for him to break his concentration. But the guard didn't even flinch. He kept his focus, standing tall as he had been trained to do. This only made the tourists more determined to provoke him. The more the guard ignored them, the more they pushed their boundaries. "Hey, you!" one of them shouted, waving their hand in front of the guard's face. "Smile for the camera." Still, the guard didn't react. His expression remained unchanged, his posture perfect. But the tourists weren't done. They started getting closer, a little too close for comfort. One of them, emboldened by the guard's silence, moved even closer and reached out to tap the guard's shoulder. It was a harmless gesture, but to the guard, it was a clear violation of the boundaries he had spent years learning to maintain. That was the moment things changed. The guard suddenly snapped to attention. His eyes now focused directly on the tourists who had crossed the line. With one swift, controlled movement, he stepped forward, towering over the group. His voice rang out, commanding and firm. "Step back." The tourists, shocked by the sudden movement, froze. They hadn't expected the guard to react this way. After all, they had seen countless other tourists approach the guards in the same manner without consequence. But this guard was different. His patience had worn thin, and he was not about to tolerate any more disrespect. For a few moments, there was silence. The tourists stood there, speechless, as the guard stood tall in front of them, his posture more imposing than ever. The rest of the crowd around them fell quiet as well, sensing the tension in the air. The tourists quickly backed off, muttering apologies under their breath. They had pushed their luck too far, and now they were facing the consequences. But it wasn't just the tourists who were stunned. Those watching the scene unfold also felt a shift in the air. Some of them applauded the guard's swift action, impressed by his unwavering stance and the firmness of his response. Others, however, seemed unsure, caught between the crowd's discomfort and a lingering sense of admiration for the guard's professionalism. What followed was a ripple effect. News of the incident spread quickly through social media, countless people sharing videos of the moment when the guard stepped forward and commanded the tourists to step back. Some people praised the guard for showing authority and standing his ground, while others questioned whether the situation had been handled appropriately. But what was clear was that the guard had made an impact both on the tourists who had disrespected him and on the broader public who had been watching. In the days that followed, the event sparked debates across the city. Some people thought that the guard had overreacted, pointing out that the tourists were only trying to have a little fun. They argued that the guard should be more patient and understanding, especially given how many people interacted with them every day. Others, however, supported the guard's actions, insisting that he had done what was necessary to maintain the dignity of the royal guard. For them, the guard's response was a reminder of the importance of respecting tradition and the role that these soldiers played in upholding it. The media coverage of the incident also drew attention to the growing problem of tourist behavior around the guards. More stories surfaced of tourists crossing the line, from teasing the guards to outright attempts to touch them. Some tourists even went so far as to challenge the guards, thinking that they were part of a show. The question that everyone was asking was, had the tourists lost their sense of respect for the royal guards and the traditions they represented? The royal guard's commanding officer released a statement the next day, backing the guard's actions. "The role of the royal guard is one of great responsibility," the statement read. "While we understand that many visitors come to witness the ceremony and take photos, it is important that they also respect the traditions and duties of our soldiers. Our guards are not there to be entertainment. They are there to serve and protect." The statement was clear. The royal guard would not tolerate disrespect, no matter how small or playful the offense might seem. As the media frenzy continued, the tourists involved in the incident began to receive their share of attention as well. Some were interviewed, and they expressed regret for their actions. They explained that they had only wanted to interact with the guard in a fun way, but they hadn't realized how serious his role was. "We didn't mean to disrespect him," one of the tourists said. "We thought it was all part of the experience." But now we understand that they are more than just part of the tourist attraction. They have a job to do, and we should have respected that. This was a turning point for both the tourists and the royal guards. The incident brought to light a larger issue, the need for tourists to be more aware of the traditions they were witnessing. The royal guards were not there to entertain. They were symbols of the monarchy, representing centuries of British history and tradition. They were soldiers with an important role to play, and that role deserved respect. In the weeks that followed, a subtle shift began to take place. Tourists were more aware of the importance of the royal guards and the need to treat them with the respect they deserved. The guard who had stood firm that day became something of a hero for those who valued tradition. People started to see the royal guards not just as statues in uniforms, but as real soldiers who had earned their place in history. The incident, though brief, had sparked a conversation that would continue to shape how tourists interacted with the royal guards in the future. For the tourists who had crossed the line, it was a wake-up call. They learned the hard way that respect for tradition is not something that can be taken for granted, especially when it comes to something as sacred as the royal guard. In this expanded version of Part 3, I've created a detailed account of the incident, emphasizing the significance of the guard's actions and the ripple effect it had on both the tourists and the public. The part highlights the growing awareness about respecting traditions and the role of the royal guards. Let me know if you need any further revisions or additions. The day after the incident, the atmosphere around Buckingham Palace felt different. It wasn't the usual buzz of tourists excitedly gathering to see the royal guards. This time, there was a sense of tension in the air. The incident with the group of tourists had made headlines, with news outlets covering the story from every angle. Social media was flooded with videos of the moment when the guard stepped forward and told the tourists to step back. Some people praised him for his authority and discipline, while others were less sure, questioning whether his reaction had been too harsh. What was clear, however, was that the situation had sparked a conversation about respect, boundaries, and the role of the royal guards. The event had become a symbol of a larger issue, the way some tourists treated the guards as mere objects of entertainment, rather than recognizing their true role in British tradition and history in the days that followed. More stories began to surface about the growing disrespect some tourists had shown toward the royal guards. Tourists were increasingly seen trying to engage with the guards in ways that went beyond the acceptable. Some tried to make them smile, while others took it a step further, attempting to get too close or even trying to touch the guards. These behaviors, which had once been rare, were now becoming more frequent. The guards' firm reaction had brought attention to this growing issue, and people began to reflect on how their actions impacted the men and women standing at attention in front of Buckingham Palace. The response to the incident was quick. The Royal Guard's commanding officer issued a statement of support for the guards' actions. "Our soldiers are entrusted with a great responsibility," the statement read. "While we appreciate the interest and respect that most visitors show toward the Royal Guards, it is important that all tourists remember the significance of the role these guards play. They are not there for entertainment or amusement, but to protect the monarchy and uphold British tradition." The message was clear. The Royal Guards were not just there to stand still and pose for photos. They were soldiers with an important job, and their role in British history and culture deserved respect. The commanding officer's statement helped to clarify this point to the public, sending a strong message that the behavior of tourists needed to change. As the media continued to cover the story, it became evident that the incident had caught the attention of many, both in the UK and around the world. Some people were upset by the tourists' behavior, feeling that they had crossed a line by treating the guards as if they were part of the attraction, not real soldiers. Others were concerned about the negative impact the incident might have on the Royal Guard's reputation. After all, they had always been a symbol of British pride and discipline, and seeing them treated with disrespect was unsettling for many. The incident sparked a debate that lasted for days. Some people took to social media to express their opinions, with many supporting the guard for standing firm in the face of disrespect. "He did the right thing," one user wrote. "The Royal Guards are not here for our amusement. They deserve our respect," another commenter agreed, writing. "People need to understand that these men and women are soldiers, not part of the tourist show." However, There were also those who disagreed with the guards' actions. Some felt that the tourists were just trying to have fun, and that the guards' response was overblown. It was just a harmless prank, one person wrote. The guard should have just ignored it. Another commenter suggested that the guard had been too strict. Maybe he should have just smiled or waved. It's not like they were hurting anyone. The debate wasn't just limited to social media. Several television and radio programs discussed the incident, with experts weighing in on both sides. Some argued that the guards were being treated unfairly by tourists, and that their reaction was understandable. Others suggested that the guards should be more patient with tourists, and that a little humor or interaction could go a long way in making the experience more enjoyable for everyone. As the public conversation grew, the Royal Guard's response to the incident became a key point of discussion. Many praised the professionalism and discipline of the guards, noting that they had a duty to uphold the traditions of the British monarchy. These guards represent something much larger than themselves, one commentator said. They are symbols of British history and pride. Their role is about more than just standing still. It's about maintaining respect for the monarchy and the country. At the same time, the incident caused the public to reflect on the role of tourists in these interactions. There were those who felt that the tourists should have known better, that they should have respected the traditions and the soldiers who stood at attention each day. Some pointed out that it wasn't just the tourist behavior that needed to change, but also the way people viewed the royal guards. These soldiers were not there to be the subject of jokes or pranks. They were there to represent something much deeper. Despite the controversy, the incident had a lasting effect on the tourists involved. The group who had been involved in the confrontation with the guard later apologized for their actions. They issued a statement expressing regret and acknowledging that they had crossed a line. "We never meant to disrespect the guard," they said. "We were just having fun, but we now realize that we should have respected his role. We are sorry for our actions and for making him uncomfortable." The apology was well received by some, while others felt that the tourists should have known better from the start. But what mattered most was the recognition that their behavior had been wrong and that the royal guards deserved respect, not just as part of a tourist attraction, but as representatives of a proud tradition. As the weeks passed, the royal guards continued their duty, standing tall and unflinching in the face of the many tourists who came to see them. The incident served as a reminder to everyone that respect for tradition and history was important. The royal guards were not simply a spectacle for visitors to enjoy. They were symbols of the enduring strength and dignity of the British monarchy. And the public, in turn, began to understand that when they visited Buckingham Palace, they were not just visiting a historical site. They were also interacting with a living symbol of British pride and tradition, one that deserved nothing less than the utmost respect. The story of that day and the consequences it brought about would linger in the minds of those who had witnessed the incident. And for many, it was a turning point in how they viewed the royal guards. It wasn't just about the tourists learning a lesson. It was about the wider world, understanding the importance of respect, and how quickly it could be lost when we forget the true value of tradition. Skip to content chat history, you said. Can you create Tori's real-life story outlines for me in a third-person style? I'll only provide the title. The story should be completed in 5 parts, ChatGPT said. I'd be happy to create story outlines for you in the third-person style. Just let me know the title of the true real-life story you want outlined, and I'll break it down into 5 parts. You said, royal guards showing no mercy to disrespectful tourists, ChatGPT said. Story outline. Royal guards showing no mercy to disrespectful tourists. Part 1. The prestige of the royal guards. The story begins with an introduction to the royal guards stationed outside iconic landmarks like Buckingham Palace. The elite soldiers are trained to maintain an unwavering composure in the face of all distractions, embodying both the discipline of their roles and the historic significance of their post. Tourists from all over the world flock to witness these ceremonial sentinels, who are known for their stoic faces and precise movements. The royal guards are not only symbols of British tradition, but also the embodiment of pride and order in the monarchy. Part 2. A growing tension. Tourists, often more interested in taking pictures than respecting the traditions, start to push the boundaries of what is acceptable. Some taunt the guards with jokes, others attempt to touch them, and a few even try to provoke a reaction by making rude gestures. While the royal guards remain impassive, the tension begins to build as the behavior of certain tourists escalates. The tourists, unaware of the intense training and discipline required of the guards, start to see them as mere objects for entertainment. The moment of reckoning is approaching. The guards are about to show they are not to be taken lightly. Part 3. The incident sparks outrage in one particular instance. A group of rowdy tourists deliberately gets too close to one of the royal guards. They ignore clear warnings and even attempt to mimic the guards' movements for their own amusement. This act of disrespect pushes one of the guards past his limits. With swift precision, he issues a sharp and forceful command. "Step back." The tourists mock him further, not realizing the gravity of their disrespect. What follows is a spectacle. A guard takes the initiative, sternly marching toward the tourists, forcing them to retreat, demonstrating that no amount of disrespect will be tolerated. Part 4. The consequences. The incident quickly goes viral, sparking a global debate about the behavior of tourists and the discipline of the royal guards. While some praise the guards for showing authority and standing their ground, others criticize the tourists for being disrespectful to the very traditions they came to witness. The backlash grows, with more visitors sharing stories of their experiences with the guards. The royal guard's commanding officer releases a statement supporting the guards' actions, citing that their primary duty is to uphold dignity, not to entertain. Tourists are reminded of the importance of respect for the cultural heritage and traditions they are experiencing. Part 5. A return to normalcy. Lessons learned. The story closes with the public's recognition of the importance of respecting the traditions surrounding the royal guards. A new wave of tourists begins to arrive, this time with a more respectful and informed attitude. The royal guards return to their post, unfazed, as the public slowly adapts to the unspoken rule that while the royal guards may be silent, they are never to be disrespected. The incident serves as a reminder to both the public and the tourists that there is a place for humor and lightheartedness. But there are also places where respect and tradition demand a far more serious approach. This outline captures the story of the royal guards, showcasing their disciplined nature and the line they draw when tourists go too far. Would you like me to expand or adjust any part of it? You said Part 1 KO. Expand KRO without heading. 1,300 words, in simple English words. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. And don't use any violated word. Aviate any violated content, ChatGPT said. Sure. Here's an expanded version of Part 1, focusing on introducing the royal guards, their prestigious role, and the growing interest tourists have in them. I've kept the tone simple and engaging to keep the audience's attention. Part 1. The prestige of the royal guards. Every country has its symbols of tradition and history, but few stand out as boldly and distinctly as the royal guards of the United Kingdom. They are more than just soldiers. They are a living link to centuries of British history, standing motionless outside iconic landmarks like Buckingham Palace. These guards are symbols of discipline, strength, and the proud heritage of the monarchy. Their uniforms are instantly recognizable: bright red tunics, black bearskin hats, and sharp polished boots that gleam in the sun. Every detail of their appearance is meticulously planned, a reflection of the centuries-old traditions they are sworn to uphold. The royal guards are not just a part of London's landscape. They are a living embodiment of the country's history. Visitors from all over the world flock to London with one goal in mind: to witness the ceremony of the changing of the guard, an event that draws crowds of thousands every day. As the guards stand at attention, their stoic faces and disciplined posture leave a lasting impression on those who come to see them. But it's more than just their appearance that fascinates people. It's the sense of mystery and reverence that surrounds them. They are not just standing there for show. These guards are highly trained soldiers, selected for their exceptional discipline, skill, and strength. The royal guards are part of a military unit known as the Household Division, which is responsible for protecting the monarch and the royal residences. These soldiers go through a rigorous selection process that includes physical endurance, mental toughness, and an ability to perform under pressure. They are not just ceremonial. They are highly trained in combat and other military duties. The training they undergo is intense, and it requires years of dedication. They have to be in top physical shape, able to march for hours without breaking their stride or breaking their focus. To be chosen as a royal guard is a great honor. And it's a position that demands both respect and responsibility, but despite the strict nature of their training, they are part of a centuries-old tradition that goes back to the reign of King Charles II in the 17th century. When the first official guards were formed, over the centuries the role of the royal guard has evolved, but the essence of their duties remains the same. Today, they stand at attention in their posts, guarding the palace and serving as symbols of Britain's unbroken royal tradition. Tourists who visit London are often in awe of the royal guards. Many are fascinated by their ability to remain motionless for long periods, seemingly unaffected by the noise and bustle around them. To an outsider, the task of standing still in such a busy and noisy environment might seem easy. But to a royal guard, it's part of their training. They are taught to block out distractions and stay focused on their duty, regardless of the chaos unfolding around them. This level of concentration is not easy to achieve, especially when surrounded by large crowds of people who are eager to snap photos and ask questions. Every day, people from all walks of life visit the palace to see the royal guards in action. Some come to see the changing of the guard ceremony, a highly orchestrated event that takes place at scheduled times during the day. This ceremony involves a highly precise changeover of the guards who are on duty. It's a display of military precision and timing, and it draws huge crowds. The ceremony has become an iconic part of London's tourist attractions, and visitors gather in the early morning hours to secure a good view of the guards as they perform their routine. For many, seeing the royal guards is a highlight of their trip to London. Others come simply to watch the guards as they stand at attention. These tourists are often struck by the guards' stillness, which seems almost unnatural. The royal guards are not supposed to move, speak, or acknowledge any tourists. They stand at their posts, maintaining their composure and their silence, often for hours at a time. The contrast between their stillness and the chaotic energy of the crowds around them creates a surreal atmosphere. Visitors, whether young or old, are fascinated by the sight. The guards' stoic expressions, their disciplined movements, and the sheer focus they bring to their task leave an impression that lasts long after the visit is over. While many tourists approach the guards with awe and respect, some are more interested in trying to get a reaction. Over time, the behavior of certain tourists begins to shift from respect to something more playful, even disruptive. The royal guards have become something of an attraction, a spectacle for visitors to interact with, rather than figures of solemn duty. Some tourists might make jokes, try to catch the guards' attention, or even attempt to photograph themselves with the guards in the background. Others are more audacious, approaching the guards too closely, or even attempting to touch them, unaware that these soldiers are not there for their entertainment. Despite this behavior, the royal guards are expected to remain professional. They have been trained to ignore distractions and continue with their duty, no matter how bizarre or disruptive the tourists become. But for all their training, they are still human,